Hello, my name is Bob Wilson, and I'm Professor of Church History at Acadia Divinity College. And it's our pleasure today to have an interview with the Reverend Dr. Millard Cherry. Dr. Cherry was the Dean of the School of Theology at Acadia, the first principal of Acadia Divinity College, and Professor of Theology in both of those institutions. Dr. Cherry, it's good to have you with us this afternoon, and we appreciate your willingness to come to talk a bit about your life and about the college and about what God's done in your life. I wonder if you could begin for us this afternoon by telling us a bit about your early life, where you were born, to whom you were born, a bit about your family.
Well, I was born in Franklin, Kentucky, December the 2nd, 1921, which makes me an old man today. I grew up on a farm. I grew up in a small family, my father, my mother, and one brother. I was the older of the two boys. I grew up during the Depression years. Consequently, I knew what it meant to live without money. I grew up in a family that was very active in the church. I remember very well that we had a huge snowstorm one weekend, and we laced the four cherries laced on their boots and walked the 2 miles to church. This was at the time reputed to be the largest rural church in the state of Kentucky. There were only 17 people there, and 4 of them were the cherries. I went to school in a 2-room grade school and then just to a 2-room high school. I myself, from the age of 13, when I was baptized, became a very active member of that same local church, and it was from that church that I was licensed to preach and later ordained.
Tell us a little bit about that church experience. You talked a bit about the family going to church, but what about the Sunday school program, the pastors who were there who might have influenced you? A bit about that.
It was a very strong country church, as I've indicated by its size, with some excellent leadership. I especially treasure to this day the influence and guidance and direction that I received from Sunday school teachers. Soon after I became a Christian and a full member of the church, I became active in what was then called the Baptist Young People's Union, but in the South very soon then became the Baptist Training Union, and graded as the Sunday school. In fact, I introduced the Baptist Training Union as just a young person myself into our church. My pastor for about 14 years, from the time I could remember, was the Reverend Dr. O.W. Yates, who at that time was teaching at Bethel College in Russellville, Kentucky, only 20 miles away. The church, when I first knew it, was a quarter-time church. Then it became a half-time, that is, with preaching on the weekend, and then finally a full-time church. In my childhood growing up, it went through all those phases.
Now, when you were growing up on a farm, you did farm work like most boys of their age? And
I most certainly did, and for your audience it would seem inappropriate, but if you lived in Kentucky at that time, tobacco was the money crop. So I worked in the tobacco, suckered tobacco, helped cut tobacco, helped strip tobacco. And if it had not been for tobacco, I wouldn't be here today.
Just looking ahead a little bit in terms of your mother and father, at what point did they pass away? And tell us a little bit more about their lives, if you would.
We were a family that did everything together. We worked together, we played together, we went to church together. My mother was far more active in the church than my father, but he was active in the church as well. My mother was superintendent of the junior Sunday school department for many years. She played the piano probably 30 years in the church, and that sort of thing. The doors just didn't open without the cherries being in church. My parents died, though, while I was fairly young. I was 20 years old and in college when my father dropped his gun and killed himself. Then when I was in graduate school, some 10 or 11 years later, my mother's car was struck by a train and she was killed. So my parents, my father was only 49, I think, when he died, and my mother was 50 when she died. Now, there was 11 years in between there because he was 11 years older than she. But
okay. And what were their names? I guess we didn't catch that.
Oh, my father's name was Daniel Borthick Cherry. My mother's name was Nema Brown Hatter Cherry.
Okay. In high school, I assume that you enjoyed studying and so on, and then you went on to college. Tell us a little bit about your high school days and then your undergraduate days.
Yes, I enjoyed my high school days. I told you that I went to a small high school, a two-room high school. I had some good teachers, though, and I especially enjoyed English and math when I was in high school. I was also very interested in sports. I was never very good at sports. I could play tennis, but the rest of it I was not very good at. However, I was very interested, and I was a cheerleader, so I used to travel with our basketball team, that sort of thing. That's an interest that I've maintained the rest of my life. I've continued to be very interested in basketball and football and hockey. Since I've been at Acadia, I've been a very strong supporter of athletics here at Acadia.
Well, maybe that leads on just to jump ahead in life. I've heard somebody say that Dr. Cherry is probably one of the biggest supporters of the Acadia sports teams. Do you do it out of love of sports? Is it a point of contact with the community, or both? I'm just curious in terms of when you came to Acadia, did you immediately start?
Oh, I started supporting the athletic program here as soon as I arrived. For example, I had just started playing Canadian football. Before that, it had been soccer. Very few people were going out to the games, and the faculty was not showing much interest at all in it. I thought the faculty should support the teams, and so I made it a point to go. I remember very well that the team went to Mount Allison to play football. I thought that the faculty ought to support, so I drove all the way to Mount Allison to support the team. That day we were beaten 103-6, as I remember the score. The truth of the matter is that ever since I have never felt bad when Acadia appeared to be running up the score on Mount Allison.
Yeah.
But I've enjoyed the sports, and I've enjoyed the people that were playing, and enjoyed the crowds. I think it's important for faculty members to support students in their endeavors.
Where did you go for your undergraduate education?
I went to Ouachita Baptist University down in Arkadelphia, Arkansas. And one of the reasons I went there was I mentioned that I had a pastor for 14 years as a boy growing up. By that time, he was head of the Bible department at Ouachita, and he persuaded my parents that that would be a good place for me to go.
Okay. And you were there for 4 years as an undergraduate?
I was there for 4 years, majored in English and minored in history. Did a second major in Bible because I had to do that to keep Dr. Yates happy.
Oh. Would you share with us a little bit about your spiritual pilgrimage from the point of time in which you became a Christian to when you felt called to ministry?
I'll really have to go back before I became a Christian in the sense of following Christ in baptism. I told you that I grew up in the church. Even as a child, when we would have what is called revival meetings down there, my brother and I would take our pillows at night and stretch out on a pew somewhere and go to sleep. So I can never remember a time when I didn't feel that I was called to preach. I then did become a Christian at the age of 12. I was baptized on my 13th birthday. And from that time on was an active, and have been ever since, a very active member of the church. One very valuable thing that happened at that time when I joined the BYPU, in those days you couldn't be in the BYPU until you were a member of the church. So I was invited right at the weekend I was baptized to become a member of the BYPU, and I did. The Southern Baptist printed literature for that program, and among other things, they had daily Bible readings, suggested daily Bible readings, and brief devotional and suggestions for prayer, especially for overseas workers. At that time, I started reading the Bible daily and engaging in prayer, something that I have continued the rest of my life.
Tell us a little bit about your theological education, where you went and what you think of that theological education and your favorite subjects.
My theological education was at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, Kentucky. After 4 years in arts at Ouachita, I went to Southern Seminary, where I took what was then the BD, the Bachelor of Divinity degree, in 3 years. I was a reasonably good student, enjoyed studying. I had not liked Greek in college, but I loved Greek in seminary. I took 3 years of Greek while I was in seminary. It finally turned out that my favorite subject was theology. And so when I went into graduate work, why I did my graduate work in the area of really of biblical theology, Old Testament, New Testament theology. As so often happens, though, I was brought here primarily to teach primarily systematic theology then. So I became eventually a professor of systematic theology. But I did, in my theological study, I did this Bachelor of Divinity degree, was accepted then into their graduate program, and my earned doctorate is a Doctor of Theology degree.
Now, at what point were you ordained to the Christian ministry?
I was ordained on December the 28th, 1941. At that time, I was 20 years old, which would surprise people in this area. The Southern Baptists do not have standards for ordination comparable to the standards here. The local church called the ordaining council. I was questioned by that council, recommended to the local church, and the local church ordained me. I was only a sophomore or a junior in college at that time.
You spent most of your professional life in Canada. How did you come to be here at Acadia?
I had finished my doctorate and was settled in a rural church in Kentucky. I think I'll back up and tell you why I got a doctor's degree before we answer that. Having grown up in the country, I always resented the fact that people thought anything on earth was good enough for people in the country. When I first learned that people did get doctor's degrees, I decided I was going to get a doctor's degree, and after I got that doctor's degree, I was going to settle down in the country and be a country preacher. That was my ambition. I had at last realized my ambition. I had graduated from the seminary, and I had my degree, a doctor's degree, and I had settled down in my rural church and was as happy as a bug in a rug. When I was called in one day to the seminary, and Dr. Dale Moody, who was head of the Department of Theology at the seminary, said, Cherry, we've had a letter from Dr. Kirkconnell at Acadia University, and they want to know if we have anybody we would like to recommend to them for the position of Professor of Systematic Theology in Acadia University. I said, well, I've never seriously considered leaving the South, much less the country. I'll have to go home and think about that. A little later, I let them know that I would be delighted to come and talk to Dr. Kirkconnell as long as it was clear that I was traveling at the university's expense and that neither the university nor I would be under any obligation. I came the last weekend in May of 1957, was interviewed by Dr. Kirkconnell and by the Faculty of Theology in Acadia University. That was on Saturday, and lo and behold, on Sunday night he offered me the position. The offer was that they would make me the top associate professor of theology in Acadia University at the grand salary of $3,250 a year. Not a month now, but a year, $3,250 per year. And that if they were satisfied with me and I was satisfied with the position, at the end of 2 years I would be made a full professor, and my salary would be raised by about $50. So you can see that my professorial rise was meteoric, but it was not because of my tremendous ability or anything like that. It was because they wanted to be able to pay me a little bit more money.
Right. Dr. Cherry, when you arrived then, what was your impression of Acadia and the School of Theology?
This was an entirely new experience for me, that theological education should be done within the context of a small liberal arts university. that it would just be one school or department within the university with 4 or 5 faculty members, whereas I had been used to a theological school with over 1,300 students, and I don't remember now how many faculty members, but many faculty members. Each faculty member would be responsible for just one subject. I arrived here with the responsibility of teaching systematic theology, history of doctrine, contemporary theology, and I introduced biblical theology, both Old Testament and New Testament theology, and even later was asked to teach a course in ethics. I was really overwhelmed by the challenge of so many different subjects. And finally, I had to face my limitations and the limitations of the school because I couldn't meet the standards that I had come to expect where I had grown up and where in my previous experience. On the other hand, I was very much impressed with the close relationship between faculty and students and the way faculty and students knew one another and interacted with one another. And very soon arrived at the conclusion that a small school could offer the basic undergraduate work as effectively, or if not more effectively, than a large school with a large faculty and a much larger student body and a much larger library facilities, that sort of thing.
Tell us a little bit about the faculty when you arrived. Who was dean at that point in time, and a little bit about the people.
Dr. Evan Whidden was the dean of theology when I arrived, and he was responsible for church history and had been teaching systematic theology. So in effect, I was relieving him of part of his load. Dr. Morris Lovesey was professor of biblical literature, which meant that he taught all of the Old Testament and all of the New Testament that was offered, and was responsible also for the biblical languages. Now, there was some help within the university with respect to Greek, but he taught some Greek, and he taught all of the Hebrew that was taught. Dr. Earl Merrick taught practical theology, and Dr. Charles Taylor was responsible for clinical pastoral education.
Now, in the midst of our series, we've talked to Dr. Lovesey, and Dr. Taylor had an interview some months ago. Give us a little bit of a flavor, however, about Dr. Whidden and Dr. Merrick.
Dr. Whidden was one of the most gracious, loving, kind, courteous human beings I've ever known. I've often said that if you use the term gentleman literally, Dr. Evan Whidden was one of God's gentle man. He was an exceptionally fine person who took a tremendous interest in his students and was very, very helpful to students. I was especially impressed with his graciousness. He was also a thorough church history scholar, too.
And Dr. Merrick?
Dr. Merrick was a very interesting person. Dr. Merrick was essentially a mystic, and you were never quite sure where Dr. Merrick would come down or what he would be doing or saying the next time you saw him. He had great rapport with his students, had a tremendous sense of concern for the needy in the community. We were, at that, soon after I came, we were able to move into Sawyer Hall. He took over the attic, and there he started to developed a program for the unfortunate, and the place was filled with discarded clothing and all such things. We had a solid stream of people coming into the building for help. Dr. Merrick was responsible for all the practical education we taught, Christian education, homiletics, the whole works, and worship on top of that. But he was greatly loved by his students.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the relationship of the School of Theology to the rest of the university.
The School of Theology was as fully integrated into the university as was the School of Engineering or the School of Education. The faculty of the School of Theology served on university committees just as the other faculty did. The faculty was entirely integrated in those days. It was really quite exciting. I really did enjoy working with people in physics and chemistry and biology and history and English and psychology, along with the faculty of theology. You shared all of the responsibility with the other faculty members for the university. For years I helped register incoming students every fall, that sort of thing, and even travel some on behalf of the university to recruit students.
What about the relationship with Dr. Kirkconnell?
The relationship with Dr. Kirkconnell was always very good. He was very interested in theological education and very supportive. You must remember that it was difficult to support, Dr. Kirkconnell found it difficult financially to support anything, because when I came in '57, the university was virtually bankrupt. I was told that they'd borrowed the very last penny that they could borrow. Consequently, money was very, very scarce. However, it was during his administration that the federal government first began to give some money to university education. Dr. Kirkconnell was very interested in trying to improve the salaries for faculty, and it was during his tenure that the salaries for faculty began to improve substantially. I told you that I started at $3,250 a year. A friend of mine came with me when I moved here, and as he was leaving, he shook his head and said, "Cherry, you're never going to be able to make it here." After all, food and everything of that sort was more expensive than it was in the southern United States, and the salaries were much less. But I did survive. I remember going to Mr. Elderkin, who was in charge of the finances of the university at that time, and asking him if I could have an advance on my first month of my salary. And I not only managed to make it on that salary, I managed to save a little bit that year.
We talk about the turbulent 60s and the relationship of the university to the denomination, and you were Dean of Theology and then the first of the principals of the new Acadia Divinity College. Tell us a little bit about that transition and how it came about, and a bit about your role in the midst of it all.
Well, as you can imagine, those were difficult times. The convention did not want to give up its control of the university, and yet the alumni was set upon having that happen. They went into the legislature, and the bill was passed. Consequently, something had to be done. The convention did say, well, if we can't have the university, could we at least have the School of Theology? And we were told that yes, you may have the School of Theology. I suspect they weren't terribly disturbed over getting rid of it, because at least they wouldn't have the necessity to provide the payment for it. By the way, the denomination had been getting quite a bargain. At that time, we were contributing $12,000 toward the operation of Acadia University at that time, and yet the university was operating a School of Theology for us and paying the salaries of all the professors. Well, it was, as I say, it was a time of tension. I was privileged as Dean of Theology to serve on the committee that set up the new Acadia Divinity College. I helped to write the charter, that kind of thing. It was a difficult time, but it was also a very interesting time. We were privy to the charter of McMaster University. It was my privilege also to discuss with the Dean of McMaster and with the faculty there their charter and where they thought it could be improved, and we were able to write some of those improvements into our charter. I also conferred with the General Secretary of the Association of Theological Schools in the United States and Canada, and we profited by their counsel, and I think we were able to write a reasonably good charter.
Now, in the midst of these negotiations that were taking place, who were the members of the committee that then worked on structuring it? They had to strike a board eventually. Tell us a little bit about that process.
Well, of course, the president of the university was there. The chairman of the board of Acadia University was there. The General Secretary, I believe he was still called the General Secretary at that time, of the denomination was there. The President of the denomination was there. And an interesting development was that the Reverend Dr. Charles Taylor was the President of the Convention at that time, but also a member of the Faculty of Theology. That did provide an interesting situation because I was there with the president of the university on one side of me and a member of my faculty on the other, but representing different interests so far as the future was concerned. Both gentlemen conducted themselves, though, in a most amiable kind of way, and I, most all of the time, enjoyed a great deal of support from both of them.
Just another follow-up question on that. In terms of the denomination, it seemed that when the School of Theology then is closed and then Acadia Divinity College comes into being,
yes,
you probably had a great job of salesmanship to do. Tell us about how you went about selling some of that to the denomination.
To begin with, of course, the denomination gave its approval to the arrangement. Also, I was greatly helped in that by the fact that when I was named the first principal of Acadia Divinity College, Dr. Abner J. Langley was named the associate principal. And he had standing in the convention that I could have never hoped to have, and also in the Baptist Federation of Canada. He did a great deal of the selling of the school to the constituency. We made a reasonably good team, I think. He could represent us well to the constituency, and I could represent us to the university. And the college continued to be affiliated with the university. The faculty of Acadia Divinity College is the Faculty of Theology in Acadia University, so the relationship is very close to within the university as well as with the denomination. Our degrees continue to be Acadia Divinity College, Acadia University degrees. Consequently, all of our courses have to be approved by the Synod of Acadia University as well as the Synod of Acadia Divinity College. And all of our graduates are approved by Acadia University Synod for their degrees.
Well, Dr. Cherry, this seems like a good place for us to end this very first session. We look forward to the rest of the interview. Thank you very much for being with us.
Yes, indeed.
Welcome. My name is Dr. Bob Wilson, and I'm Professor of Church History at Acadia Divinity College. And this is the second in our series of interviews with the Reverend Dr. Millard R. Cherry, former principal of Acadia Divinity College and Professor of Theology at both the School of Theology and Acadia Divinity College. Dr. Cherry, it's good to have you with us, and I wonder if we can pick up our theme where we left off in the last interview. One of the things that we didn't talk about was when you became the Dean of Theology of the university.
I became acting Dean of Theology in August of 1943.
63?
1963, yeah. Thank you. That 43 would have been before I graduated from college. An interesting thing happened in connection with that. Dr. Whidden was having a serious problem with his eyesight and had to retire as dean, and was always coming up close to the natural time for retirement in any event. I was recommended to the administration for the position of Dean of Theology. Dr. Longley was acting in the president's position at the time. I believe that Dr. Kirkconnell was ill. Dr. Longley called me in and said that they wanted to offer me the position of acting Dean of Theology, and that with all likelihood then that I would be named Dean of Theology. I told Dr. Longley that the Dean of Theology, or any dean in the university, needed to be a married person because of all the necessity for entertaining and that sort of thing. And I went on to say, I don't have anything against marriage, but I will not get married in order to be Dean of Theology. In any event, I was made the acting Dean of Theology in August of 63 until December of 63, at which time I was made Dean of Theology in Acadia University. And I served in that capacity then until such time as we became Acadia Divinity College, and continued as Dean of Theology because remember I told you that the charter requires that or I believe I did, the charter, in any event, the charter of Acadia Divinity College requires that the principal of Acadia Divinity College be the Dean of Theology in Acadia University. So I continued in that position until I retired as dean in 1973.
Now, one of the first tasks facing you when Acadia Divinity College was founded was that you not only had been the School of Theology, but a number of people had retired. You had to begin building a new faculty. Allison Trites had arrived on faculty before that time. Tell us about that faculty as it began as Acadia Divinity College.
Well, let's go back to Allison Trites before that. I realized that it was virtually impossible for one man to teach all the Old Testament and all the New Testament, plus the languages that were required for a Bachelor of Divinity degree. So I went to Dr. Kirkconnell with a request, in spite of the woeful financial condition of the university, to request for another professor in the Department of Biblical Literature in the School of Theology. I also took the liberty to go talk to Dr. Frank Eaton, who longtime secretary of the board. Well, to my great joy, they approved the recommendation, and we began to search for a professor of New Testament. At that time, Allison Trites was working on his doctorate in London, at Oxford, and I recommended him, and he was appointed to the Faculty of Theology. About the same time that we were becoming Acadia Divinity College, we needed to fill the position of church history that had been vacated by Dr. Whidden. Dr. Whidden had returned to teach for a year or two after retirement. I recommended Dr. Jerry Zeman to the then Board of Trustees to the Board of Governors of Acadia University and the Interim Board of Trustees of Acadia Divinity College, and he was really the first appointment that the Acadia Divinity College Board of Trustees made to the faculty. Both of those proved to be singularly good appointments, and I take considerable pride in the fact that it was on my recommendation that they were made members of the faculty.
Right. Now, soon after that, Dr. Osberg also came on the scene.
Yes. Dr. Langley recruited Dr. Osberg. Dr. Osberg proved to be a very valuable member of our faculty, one of the most cooperative persons with whom I have worked in all of my tenure at Acadia.
During those years when you were dean and vice principal or associate principal, it was a turbulent time in the midst of the convention. What kind of student body was coming to you? Because the numbers had been quite low through the early 60s and then began to build. How did you cope then with those changes in numbers and the flavor of students? Was it different? And tell us a little bit about what that was like.
When I came, most of the students in theology had been pre-theology students at Acadia University. And the dean of theology had been responsible for them from the time they entered Acadia University until they graduated with their theology degree. All of that changed through the years. After we became a college in our own right, students began coming from many, many schools. And it was not long until students who had done their undergraduate work at Acadia would be very much in a minority. After Dr. Langley became principal, but while I was still doing the dean's work under the title Associate Dean of Theology, we ceased having responsibility for the pre-theology students in Acadia University. Dr. Langley felt that that was not what we needed to be doing. Mm-hmm. We lost that contact, and it even came to the point that we often did not know who the pre-theology students were in the university. So the complexion of the college changed in that sense, that we were now bringing in students from all over Canada, and a few from the United States and a few from abroad. Also, the very fact that we could go from 30 students to 100 students made a great deal of difference in terms of logistics. It also made life more interesting.
In your own teaching career, I've heard people say that Cherry not only taught, he preached his subject sometimes. Did you have favorites? What were your favorite courses and your approach to those courses?
I probably enjoyed teaching my little course in Christian ethics, which was the biblical introduction to Christian ethics. It was not a philosophical understanding of ethics. I probably enjoyed that as much or more than any other course that I taught. Maybe just because that has to do with the everyday living of the Christian life.